Hey everybody, it is Trags, Mike Petralia back with the latest episode of Code Reds on the CLNS Media Network, talking all things Cincinnati baseball. My privilege and pleasure, genuine pleasure I might add, to talk with the host of Reds Live, Brian Giesenschlag. He does a great job before and after every Reds game on Bally Sports Ohio, Bally Sports Cincinnati. Brian, welcome.
Trags, thanks, man. I'm excited. This is fun.
Yeah, this is going to be a really fun podcast episode, I believe, because we'll talk baseball. We might squeeze in some hockey at the end. I'm a hockey Krishna, as we call it.
I know you are.
Back in Boston. So anyway, we'll get to the Reds. I actually think, Brian, it's been a pretty good start given what David Bell and company have had to deal with starting in spring training. I've talked with a number of people about that. Gordon Whitmire last week of the Cincinnati Enquirer. I talked to Rob Dibble, talked to Cowboy, all about the subject of what the Reds have had to deal with really since the onset of spring training. To see them 15-13 through 28 games, I think it's a good sign for being competitive going forward. Your take?
I think it's a great sign. I think if the Reds hadn't been dealing with all those things you talked about, the injuries, the suspension to Noelvi Marte, I think this start still, even if those guys have been part of the picture, I think given where this team has been recently early in the season in the past, I think you take it. It's a long season. And when they get off to the terrible start, which they've done for most of the last decade, what was it, 7-15 last year?
You can feed 22 the year before.
3-22 the year before. Yeah, you can feed yourself, hey, it's a long season, but with those types of starts, it rings a little bit hollow. With a start that's even slightly better than average, which I think is where they are right now,
right?
You can sell yourself that idea. And it's slightly better than average in a results-based, and it's a results business. We can't get around that.
Right.
Results-based, it's slightly better than average, but I think the stories within those games and the stories within those players that have performed so far, I think there are more encouraging things there that would maybe put a little bit more shine on the 3 games over 500 after 28 games.
The starter's ERA took a bit of a hit on Sunday with the 4-run first inning from Andrew Abbott. But overall, the starter's ERA much improved over the last couple of years, I would say. And certainly the bullpen has been a big boost in terms of 2 players I want to point out. Not Alexis Diaz. I would say, first of all, Fernando Cruz has been the star, the stopper of that bullpen. And Brent Suter, he has been called on a lot here in the early part of the year. I just want to get your impression, your take on the big difference between the pitching staff of the last 2 years and this year through 28 games.
Yeah. Looking at the starters, Sam and I have talked a lot about this on the pregame show, and it's, at the end of every postgame show when we preview the upcoming starters for the series, we just look at, 3 at a time. And it's so different than it's been at sometimes in the past when you can look at probables for a 3 or a 4 game series and feel pretty good about your chances to be in each of those games, regardless of who the opposition is, regardless of what the lineup looks like on the other side, or regardless of who the other starters are. That's been good this year, and they've dealt with, missing a couple of games from Frankie Montas. Certainly, Brandon Williamson, I think, was thought to maybe be a part of this a couple of months ago, and he's not in there right now. But getting Nick Lodolo back, having the versatility of a Nick Martinez, this puts this Reds team and this starting rotation in a position that they haven't been in years past. And speaking of that, when you go to the bullpen, how many times when we've asked David Bell or someone else about Nick Martinez, Brent Suter, did he reference those guys and say it's something we just didn't have last year? And I think that's the easiest way to put it, is to recognize that you had quality pitchers that could be called upon in certain situations. Sometimes it's just for length. Sometimes it's when you need length and really something a little bit more to stay in a game. Sometimes it's when you just need someone that's available all the time, Brent Suter, that can go out and do it for an inning or can do it for 3 innings. So the Reds really, I feel like, addressed that in the offseason, and it always looks good on paper, but seeing it now come to fruition in those situations, in games, in tight games, in some games that the Reds have been able to win, that's been a big difference for this team. And Fernando Cruz, which you're right, has been the star of the bullpen so far, but he's also become one of the best stories in baseball. It's still, not that big of a sample size for Fernando Cruz, but just given his path, given the fact that he was a 32-year-old rookie last year who had pitched everywhere and not been able to stick, and now he's here, and now he's being talked about in those high leverage situations as that's the guy I want out there. That's the guy. And so far, in a couple of big jams early in the season, he's been the guy. So until cracks show anywhere, you're going to go with that. And Fernando Cruz has been spectacular.
I think he had back-to-back efforts against the Phillies, I believe it was, where he had bases loaded and one out, and he comes in relief and gets out of that jam. And then the next night, runners on second and third, and nobody out, and gets out of that. To me, those are really defining moments of a season for an individual pitcher. Something that, like, when you put that down on the resume early in the year, it's something you can put in the bank. I talked about that with Sam LeCure, and I know you have too. The 20 strikeouts in 10 1/3 innings for Fernando Cruz is really, truly a remarkable stat.
Yeah, well, it's not just the splitter. It's not just that pitch, which rightfully so is being talked about right now as one of the best pitches that guys see around the league. But I talked to Cruz a couple of times just about, what is it? You've got the splitter. You've had the splitter. And he said, look, everything about my fastball is better this year. It's ticked up a little bit in velocity. He says that it's moving a touch more. And so it's the combination of those things. When you can throw the splitter at 80 miles an hour and it drops off the table and no one knows where it's going, and then you can back that up with 94 well located, he's learning to do those things. And David Bell talked about the fact that he's also now learning to read hitters, to read swings. And that's kind of, I think, the next level in pitching. Everybody can talk about it, but you have to feel. You have to have that feel for what you're capable of and your stuff before, I think, mentally you can allow yourself to go a little bit deeper into reading swings. He said, yes, he's been able to do that better this season. But the biggest thing for him is just after last year, proving that he could be here, proving that it belongs, given his resume of where he's been. He said, now I can come to the ballpark and I'm coming to work. And he said, I want the ball. I want those situations. But there is a big difference in how he feels about his role and his place based on going from last year and coming out of nowhere to being one of the main guys this year.
The starter's ERA 4.15, I believe it is, and the overall team ERA 3.90. That's 18/10 of a run better than the opposition. That to me is a good indicator.
Yeah.
Certainly the overall team ERA has just improved a great deal. You have to give Nick Kroll and the personnel department a ton of credit for reshaping what the pitching staff is.
Yeah, and they knew that they had to, but the thing that I give Nick and those guys and Brad Metter and the whole front office and all the scouts and the baseball people is, like I said, you can, once you settle on a philosophy, which this team did, when they were dealing players and kind of tearing it down a couple of years ago, not everyone, but a lot of people that I talked to that were disgruntled about the state of baseball in Cincinnati for the past several years said, oh, here we go again. They're trading all of our decent players and they're doing this and whatnot. And they said, it's just like it's always been. And I said, listen, we don't know until we get on the other side of this. But what I saw when they were doing that was finally an organizational thought that made sense. The plan that was in place to trade Luis Castillo, to trade Tyler Mahle, when they had great value, was something that hadn't always been the case here in the past. And I think when they got to that point a couple of off seasons ago where they said, this is what we're going to do, and it's going to be painful in the short term, but we believe in the decisions that we make going forward, everything changed. And in the off season, some of these moves were still, it looks okay on paper. Maybe we'll see. And some are still, the jury's still out on some of these things. But you have seen specifically with the pitching staff, some of the things and decisions that they've made have changed this team. They took that step last year with some of the young players that they got in some of those deals and some of the high draft picks specifically to the pitching, which they had brought along. And it all lined up a little bit. It all kind of meshed. And I think in the offseason, they addressed very carefully some of those things. And that's some of the positive that you're seeing right now.
Chatting up Brian Giesenschlag of Bally Sports Ohio, the host of Reds Live and Blue Jackets Live for you hockey fans out there. Does a phenomenal job on both. All right, after the Reds swept the LA Angels, Brian, they were in very good shape, but they knew that there was a storm cloud ahead of them. And sometimes vehicles, planes, boats, whatever, are built to weather rough seas or rough air. And the next 31 games, really a gauntlet for these Reds, and they have started it off, I think, reasonably well, splitting with the Philadelphia Phillies, team that was in the World Series 2 years ago, going 1-2 on the road, all the 2 losses, 1-run losses against the defending champ Texas Rangers on the road. But these 31 games coming up, how do you think it will define the Reds season?
Again, defining the season as a whole is still, I think, something that's too early to say, but defining different quadrants of the season and defining what a new Reds team could possibly be, I think we'll look to see not just the wins and losses here, but how they react. There are going to be some ups and downs. Winning the season series against the Phillies, that's a big start. Not to give the Phillies too much credit, but that's the kind of thing that this Reds team early in a season before, that would have been a big ask. Moving forward, the Texas series, I thought was good. I thought they were going to win the series in Game 3, and you come down to the final pitch and you have a line drive that would have tied the game that just finds a glove. So I think some of the steps last year and some of the leadership on this team from a Luke Maile, some of the veterans, guys, Frankie Montas has stepped into some of those roles. I think Brent Suter, I think this team, even with its young players still being relatively inexperienced mostly, I think they embrace the challenge. I think they embrace playing some of these teams. I'm excited to watch Elly De La Cruz in San Diego playing across from Tatis and Machado and Bogarts. I'm excited to see that. I like seeing them on the road in full ballparks to see how they react. And so far, they've reacted really well. They won some of those games last year when they were ahead of schedule and weren't supposed to win those games. I don't want to sound like a homer, but I believe the makeup of this team has shown itself the last season plus a month or two to be different, to be something that really isn't just something we're describing. I believe that it works, and I think they're going to maybe not set the world on fire, but I think they're going to address these challenges of the schedule the next month pretty well. And then you see when you get a TJ Friedl back, and then you see hopefully you get some other help down the road, whatever that might be, whoever gets healthy or back from suspension, Friedl being the first, hopefully. I like the way the team is put together, and I like the way that it feels. When you're around professional teams on a regular basis, no matter the sport, some of those rooms, some of those locker rooms and clubhouses feel different, and some of them feel like professional athletes coming to work, and some of them feel like ball players coming to play. I feel like that's what this team feels like.
Great point. I agree, and I've had that conversation with a number of Reds, Brent Suter being certainly one of them.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk to him, you get the sense that he's, the expression part of a family, but he is like the older uncle of a brotherhood.
Right.
Athletes, we've all heard this before, right, Brian?
Yeah.
Athletes are a brotherhood. Well, he's the old uncle that shows up, that kind of gets everybody on the same page, make sure everybody's going in the same direction. I don't want to use father figure. I think that's a little trite cliche, but the old uncle who comes into the party and everybody knows him, knows what he's about. That's what Brent Suter is, but it's just such a natural feeling inside that clubhouse. And I think the guys get along. And sometimes that it matters. And, on teams with a lot of talent, maybe it doesn't matter as much. I think, like you've said, on a team that's trying to find itself, a younger team, that matters a whole lot.
It does. And it was funny. We'd all heard of Brent Suter and had limited interaction with Brent Suter when he was with Milwaukee all those years coming back, or if you went to some, Moeller event here in town. But I was so excited when that happened. And then I found out last minute, he was a last minute replacement on the Reds caravan in the off season. Someone else couldn't make it. And of course he was in town and of course said yes at the last minute. And I was on the caravan with him for a couple of days. And I couldn't wait to talk to him. And we just sat in the back of the bus with a couple of Reds prospects. Edwin Arroyo was on that. And just sitting back there and getting to know him a little bit and talking to him, it was everything you'd heard about. And you just got the sense that as long as he, continues to do what he's always done, it was a really good fit. Felt like it from the start, just watching him, not only with those young players on the bus, but certainly when he got in the clubhouse and certainly in front of the public and certainly when he's dealing with us. Not everyone can or wants to be that guy or be that way and be that open. He does, and you're right. It works in so many ways for this squad. He's been a big boost.
Well, and it's important to note, and I think you would agree with this, Brian. It's one thing to have that personality in the clubhouse, be well respected, be the Ted Karras of the Cincinnati Reds, if you will, if I can cross sports here and use that metaphor. Ted Karras is a captain, but he knows he has to produce to be respected. Brent Suter is the same way. He's come in some huge moments. First of all, there was, I believe, against the Nationals where he came in and kind of saved the day late in the game. I think on the Sunday game that the Reds came from behind and won on back-to-back homers. But the game that really stands out is when Frankie Montas got hurt. 16 pitches in. And he comes in and throws 3 1/3 innings. And I remember asking him after the game, you remember the last time you threw that many innings? And he said, yeah, I think it was a starter in 2020, but it had just been forever since he had, done that. But that's how you maintain your credibility and your cred inside the clubhouse.
Yeah, I love that game because I was thinking, and he was talking afterwards. Listen, he's barely seated in the bullpen, let alone having done anything that makes him game ready at all. He said, I didn't get to do my activation. He probably didn't have everything buttoned up and all of his stuff with him that he needed. And then all of a sudden that happens. And to see him as quickly as he did get loose, get in the game. Clearly he had whatever he wanted, but it wasn't that long. He walked the first guy that he faced and then put the Reds in position to be able to come back and get that game, just to put him in position. They just needed someone to calm the waters, and he's the perfect guy for that. Physically, mentally, every way possible, he was the perfect fit for that situation, and those are hard to find.
And that was a shutout. And you know what? That brings up my golfing outing on Sunday at Sharon Woods because I was rushing to get to the tee. Both of my golf cleats were not tied. I was a wreck. The starter wanted me and my significant other, the lovely Deborah Ann, to get up to the tee right away, and I shanked my drive into the woods. Everybody that knows Sharon Woods, the first one is a dog-leg right, and I put it right in the trees, and I'm screaming, yelling at myself, really upset, but I settled down just like Brent Suter did after one bad shot and had a decent 8 holes after that. So I can relate, Brian. That's the whole point of that lengthy anecdote is that I can relate.
Yeah, but to wrap that up, that's not something that you train for. Those guys have to be ready. They don't know if they're going to pitch on a certain day, but they generally know the window of the innings or the matchups when they might be up and might be in the game. Yeah, no one can predict that. And for him to not even flinch and then to kind of embrace it the way that he did, I think everyone saw that and took a deep breath and went, oh, okay. That guy's got it for a little while until we get the wheels back on and then we can go.
That was a shutout win. That really was a remarkable performance. I think not only by Brent Suter but the entire team to kind of collectively collect their breath, take a deep breath, and win that game. All right, want to move on to one of the silver linings of this team, and that is the fact that they are 15-13. You know what their team average is, Brian? Batting average?
Batting average? I don't, but I'll guess 228. 228.
A lot lower than that. It's 219.
Okay.
And I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is you have so many guys who have really yet to hit their rhythm, Ellie aside, and even Spencer Steer aside, who haven't hit their rhythm, and they're 2 games above 500. And it just goes to show that not everybody has to be producing at a high level for this team to be a winning team.
No, and that's what I meant earlier when I said even looking a little bit more deeply behind the results, you have to feel good for exactly that reason. To use another trite and cliche thing that, go back to the back of the baseball card. Some of those guys are not going to stay where they are for the whole season or for an extended stretch, but they're dealing with that right now. And so I think you have to feel good about that. And you have to have pieces that step up and work. Santiago Espinal, after a slow start, all of a sudden became a contributor when some other guys were not feeling it as much. On Sunday in the series finale in Texas, despite the fact that the bench was depleted because Stevenson and Encarnacion Strand were both, apparently not available, you still had the perfect guy for that situation to bring Bubba Thompson in to run in the 9th inning. And, it's a roster that's been constructed, I think, with that in mind. And that set the Reds up in that situation for the chance to win the game. But no one has performed. Very few have performed where you would have hoped or expected them to be at this point. And that's not ever going to happen, or rarely will it happen all at once. But if you can have, this guy kick in here and this guy kick in here, and then the next guy comes around, then you've got something. And when you see, Jonathan India's kind of back in the saddle, at least after 3 or 4 games, when you can get Jake Fraley back from being sick and maybe get Jake Fraley back to where he was early in the season when he was one of the few guys that did start pretty well. All those things are positives, man, for a team that I think has, like I said, just has a good feel about it.
All right, let's wrap up in the next, 10 minutes, however much time we have.
I got time. It's sunny outside, man. Come on.
You look chill, might I add.
Well,
are you a golfer, by the way?
Oh, man, that's a longer story than we have time for. It's a funny story.
Okay.
Used to be a golfer. Haven't ruled out being a golfer again.
All right.
But I'm on an extended hiatus. We can do that one next time.
This sounds like a back problem. Am I guessing right or wrong?
Wrong.
Or off? Okay.
Not that I don't have a bad back, because I do, but that's not the whole reason.
Got it. Okay. The reason I want to get into some fun stories here is I think you have a fascinating job. I think you get to work with some unique characters who have different perspectives on the Reds and other things as well. But what is it like working with so many different personalities in the studio? Sam LeCure, obviously, Chris Welsh, among the others. What is that like?
You're right. I love my job. I never envisioned myself in this job. But once I kind of hit it, I kind of felt at home with it. I love, and I do love working with different people, and I love working different sports. John Sadak and I have this conversation a lot about going from one sport to the next, or one broadcast partner to the next. And I've kind of picked his brain a little bit about how he does it. He's obviously really, really good at what he does. But I love it because we exist a little bit outside of the framework of the 9-inning game. It took me a while doing this to kind of take my serious broadcaster hat off for a little while, or allow myself to take it off. When I started doing this, everybody you want to be professional, you want to be well thought of, you want to keep your job.
I understand.
I have very strong feelings about shtick in sports radio, sports broadcasting, whatever. in that it's rare that it works. It's rare that you're good at it. It is much more
So true.
Yeah, much more prevalent that someone is attempting shtick and failing and doesn't realize it. So I never wanted to be the shtick guy. So it took me a while. I could always be the TV guy, but it took me a while, and it took me a couple of partners like Sam to be able to relax a little bit more, to the point where I think we have a product that I think benefits the game, because we're unlike the game, because we could talk a little bit more. We can laugh a little bit more. We have a little more breathing room to do that than they do within the 9-inning framework. And so I hope that comes across, because Sam and I have a blast, and Chris and I have a blast.
Very much so. And you know what strikes me about you, Brian? You're never at a loss for words. And here's a question I have. And I've wondered this oftentimes when watching either with you and Sam, or you and Chris, or whoever it might be. And that is, are you ever taken aback, like, I didn't see that analysis coming? Or
have you met Sam LaCure?
Well, I have, and I had him on this very podcast 2 weeks ago. So the answer is yes. But I'm just curious. You are so smooth, Brian, and like he could say, well, the world's coming to an end, and I don't think the Reds, I don't think they're really good enough to be around through the month of July. And you look at the camera and go, we'll be back right after this. Or you'll have, not even that. That's wrong. Incorrect. You'll make some cogent point about some takeaway from the game you just watched.
Right.
And you'll say something along the lines of, the Reds get ready to battle the Rangers in game number 3 tomorrow. We'll have a look ahead. How do you do that?
Wow.
I know I asked a lot there. I jammed in. I used a shoehorn to jam in a lot.
You used a shoehorn. No, I know where you're going. But no, the first question I think was, do you ever get caught off guard? Every day. Every day Sam says something, or at times Chris Welsh says something that is clearly something I didn't expect. I work with Sam more often, and Sam is a little bit more free with his thoughts and his words. And so that happens on a regular basis, but that was part of the evolution of having to, I think it may be better to grow into this role. But, the way I look at it, and I would, Sam would, if he happened to be on this podcast right now or listening to us, he would agree. From the start, it worked with us because I really appreciate everything that he brings. And I really, I know that he brings an element that, one, I'm not funny and spontaneous as much as he is. 2, I didn't play the game at the highest level. He brings all of that into one guy. And so I look at the show kind of like a train ride or a roller coaster ride, and Sam is going to be flying down the tracks, and people are going to be loving it. They got their hands in the air. They're woo. And that's Sam. But then every now and then I'm along for the ride. I'm having a good time too. But every now and then I have to keep it on the tracks, and I have to keep it from jumping off the cliff. And I hope that it comes across as both of us enjoying the ride. We both have these different roles. And he would say the same thing. He'd go, man, Gies is there as my guardrails, but Gies also lets me fly all over the place between those guardrails and be himself. And Chris is the same way. Chris has so many great stories from the game and from guys that he played with and against, or, passed along the way. And to me, I love those. And I try to get as many of those as I can from those guys, because that's great TV. But I love not knowing what's coming next. And then I just, pray that in some way my preparation and my, whatever can help me respond accordingly, to not ever dissuade someone from doing that or being themselves or being spontaneous, but to just enjoy it and keep going and making it something, bring more people into it. That's kind of how I see it. But I love that role, and I love doing it.
I would be remiss if I didn't bring up a former colleague.
Please.
And I think you know where I'm going. I think you will know once I say the name. Dan Horde.
Yes.
And I've had him on the Jungle Roar podcast talking Bengals football. And I think, as you were just saying what you just said about Sam, I was thinking of his
relationship with Lap.
And I think it's very similar, only obviously the difference is there, in the midst of the tempo of the actual game. That's a lot different, when you're going back and forth a lot more quickly. But I'm just curious, when you guys worked together at Channel 19, what was that like for those who may not remember? And what did you gain from Dan? And, how much fun was that?
First off, let's set the timeline. That was 05, 06. And I moved here for that job from Dallas, having never been to Cincinnati before my interview. And I was in a really, I wasn't young, but, clearly it was 20 years ago. And I came up here, and the sports department at Channel 19 was exactly what I was looking for. I was working in Dallas at a cable news channel that did sports, but we mostly did studio shows. We didn't get out a lot. We didn't cover a lot of things firsthand. We did a lot of talk and a lot of whatnot. And I really wanted to get back out and be around the teams and be around the games and tell those stories myself firsthand. And so when I got here, it was Dan Horde and Rufus was producing, and Joe Daneman, if you could believe that, was, just out of college and returning after his internship, but he was already there. Dan Wood, the photographer, Eric Staub, Big Red. They had this whole crew that back in the day when you could still have that many people in a sports department, and they had some of the resources to travel and some of the resources to do some things. So it was this great situation that I walked into. But Dan was then and is now the ultimate professional. He had a great time because, we laughed about the bald guys and all that. That was our shtick. But it wasn't a reach, Trags. It wasn't a reach.
No.
And so it worked. But I did, but I don't live and die by the shtick.
No, I know you don't. You've made that very clear, Brian.
But anyway, it was great for me to come to a new city and a new market and get to be involved on a level with local sports, professional and otherwise, that I hadn't as much before, and get to see Dan do it and get to see how well respected he was, and just get to kind of observe, in that short amount of time that we were never best friends away from the studio, but professionally, and it was, and only because, I had young kids in a new city and all that. I just didn't hang out. We didn't go out, but professionally it worked. And yeah, it was a great influence and a great entry point to Cincinnati, and giving me some of that about, here's what to expect in Cincinnati, what people think and how they receive you. One of the Dan Horde stories that I'll remember was one of my first days on the job. The Reds were about to start the season. Jerry Narin was the manager, and it was back when, right before they came back from, at that time, Sarasota, they would stop in Louisville and play the Bats, on a Sunday afternoon, and then opening day was, Tuesday or whatever. And I went down there with Dan and a photographer, and post game we were going down to talk to Narin in the Bats manager's office. And if Dan hadn't have been a cool guy, he could have done two things. He could have just kind of thrown me under the bus, or he could have done it for a good laugh, and both of them would have been completely acceptable. I wouldn't have had a problem with either one. But, I didn't know anybody. I hadn't met Narin. I hadn't met the beat writers yet. And they were all in there. And that was back when there were 3 or 4 beat writers.
Right.
And we got in there in the room. And right before we went in, he leaned over my shoulder and he goes, "Hey, man, just so you know, none of these other guys are going to ask a question until you ask all of yours." And I went, because I didn't know that the television relationship at that time was what it was. And so, I quickly tried to pull myself together and formulate a few sentences to get out in that situation when I was a little nervous. But if I had been made aware of that fact in the moment or right at the moment when no one was saying anything, I might have gotten off to a less stellar start with the Reds and Jerry and Aaron and the beat writers. But, Dan,
That's the kind
he
of
gave
guy
me that.
Dano is.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
He gave it to me. So that was a good Dan Horde story.
Yeah, it was. And I will say, and I'm not just blowing smoke here, you and Dan have been great to me since I came back into this market in 2021, started covering the Bengals for 3 years, my first full year now doing the Reds. But, having covered Boston sports, it was a phenomenal experience. There's no question about it. I wouldn't trade it for the world. But coming back home where my roots are and a lot of my friends and family still are, it's a different vibe, and it's a great vibe. But you want to get, situated here.
And listen, I was an outsider, and we, people from Cincinnati, we all can agree on this. The wonderful people of the Queen City, they give you some side eye until they feel like that you have earned your trust and earned your way into the conversation here locally. You're
vested.
I've been in for a while.
Yeah, once you're vested in the product here. And trying to deliver it to the fans in an entertaining way, then they got you.
Marty Brenneman said last year, and it was at a time when I wasn't doing the interview. Dream, our producer, was doing the interview about the death of Tom Browning, and he was talking to Marty, and in the context of the Browning being the everyman, player and former Red that everybody loved, Marty Brenneman said, listen, and I lived this, and I agree with him 100%. He said, Cincinnati is probably the most provincial city in the country, in that the walls go up at the city limits, and, everybody's welcome to come in, but until you find your place and display what you're bringing to the community, you might be shown the door. It's a little bit cliquish. And he was referring to how, Browning wasn't from here, but once he pitched here, played here, lived here, and put himself in the community, he was one of us. And he never left. And when I came here 20 years ago, my wife, we're both lifelong Texans, although she's lived a little bit around. When we came here 20 years ago, she looked at me before I came and she went, 5 years? And I went, I don't know anything about Cincinnati, but that sounds good. We can get in, and I don't know where we'll go next. Maybe it's back to Texas. But I had a couple of people early on tell me, they said, you know what? I know you're not from here, but if you get in it, it's a good place and you're probably really going to like it. So make sure you give it a shot. And let's just say that was almost 20 years ago that those conversations were happening, and my wife and my family were here and really happy to be here.
Give you one more question, then I'll let you go. And that's Jean-Luc Grandpierre and the Stanley Cup playoffs. I want you to, talk about what it is like, working with Jean-Luc on a Blue Jackets Live, and your thoughts about the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Man, Jean-Luc Grandpierre is one of my favorite people in the world. And what I love about that, and I told him from the start, is when we got paired up on the desk after one of my other favorite people in the world, Billy Davidge, retired, to me, right from the start, as soon as we hit it off right from the start, Jean-Luc and I did, and I loved it because I'm still a kid from a tiny town in Texas where, when I say tiny town, I mean 5,000 people. I graduated high school with fewer than 100 people in my class. We had high school football, which we were really good at, and nothing else. We didn't have soccer. I didn't even have soccer to play. You had football year round, and maybe you ran track to stay in shape for football. The book and the movie Friday Night Lights, that's my hometown. That's not legitimately, but that's my hometown. That's how it profiles. And so I thought, man, here I am. A kid that never knew anything about hockey, didn't grow up with hockey. And right now I'm working NHL games with a former player who's French Canadian, with Haitian roots. And we're great friends. And I love that. Who would have put together the kid from the tiny town in Texas who
phenomenal.
had this terrible accent, didn't know anything about hockey, and now I'm working with and friends with a guy like that. So I love Jean-Luc, and we have a blast. And watching him do the playoffs on TNT, watching Jody Shelley do the same thing, who's also a good friend from the Blue Jackets broadcast.
Obviously.
I'm so proud. Yeah, I'm so proud of those guys and so proud to watch them. Jody and I started with the Blue Jackets at the same time, right after he retired as a player. And he has grown exponentially as a broadcaster. And Jean-Luc came to it a little bit later, but has been kind of on the same trajectory, growing how well they do TV. And so I'm so proud of those guys. And then to answer the second question, there's nothing like the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Correct.
And, with the Blue Jackets, they were in 4 of 5 years. And so I got to experience, first round, and then I got to experience the greatest upset when they swept Tampa in the first round.
Right.
But that's it. I haven't gotten that deeper run, which from all your time in Boston and watching that franchise. But there's nothing like it. And even now when we have baseball and I always find myself flipping over. I'm not consuming entire games right now in the postseason, but nightly before I turn it off and go to bed, I'm flipping over to something and catching 15 minutes of Kings Oilers or 15 minutes of Rangers Caps. There's nothing like it, and I absolutely love it.
Dallas beating Vegas in overtime to really essentially, for all intents and purposes, keep their season alive on Saturday.
Yeah, and Dallas was one of my early picks because I and not because I lived there. I mean, I was there when the Stars won it all in '99. That was kind of my first exposure to hockey at all. But I liked them going into the playoffs because you got to have great goaltending, and Jake Ottinger has been that. But I just kind of liked the presence of their team and the way that they played this year out west, and I was a little surprised to see them go down 2 games.
You do see who the Bruins, if they eliminate Toronto, and I'm pretty sure they will. Who they will probably face in the second round, the Florida Panthers.
Yes, and Billy Zito, the GM and now president of hockey ops there, was an assistant GM in Columbus, and so we all got to know him a little bit. Fantastic guy, brilliant, out of the box. Why he has this why not attitude, why can't we attitude wherever he is. He was an agent before, and then he was in the front office, and he always has that. And I admire people like that so much, and I wish I was more like that. People that just go, well, why wouldn't it work? Why can't we do it? I love that attitude, and that's what he's taken to Florida. Made the bold move to make the trade for Matthew Tkachuk right when he got there. And here they are, finals last year and playing pretty well right now, along with former Jacket Sergei Bobrovsky.
There you go.
When are we going to do a hockey show, Trags?
That is a great question.
When are we going to do a hockey podcast?
So I'm just going to vent here. One of my only bitter moments as a Cincinnati youth was when the Cincinnati Stingers essentially folded. They didn't go with Wayne Gretzky and the Hartford Whalers and the Winnipeg Jets. I'm trying to remember Edmonton, obviously. Those 4 teams. When they didn't make that move to the NHL, I was really bitter because I have always felt that Cincinnati would support an NHL team. But to answer your question, when they pay me. That'll be never, but I digress.
We can still talk about it in the press box.
Yeah, we can do it there, and we'll have to get creative to find other platforms. How's that for an answer?
I like that. I can deal with that. That's a good answer. And
then maybe someday I'll get the answer to your
tell you the golf story.
Playing golf. So
tell you the golf story.
Anyway, you are a pro's pro, Brian Giesenschlag. Thanks for joining me.
No, feel the same about you. I appreciate the opportunity. It was fun. Good talk.
It was. He is Brian Giesenschlag. You can watch him host Reds Live before and after every Reds game on Bally Sports Ohio. My name is Mike Petralia Trags. I want to thank everybody for downloading this episode of Code Reds.